Revelation 3680. From the 8th of February 1946. Free will, cause of need and low. I strengthen the human being's will at all times, but I do not force it. And if you see the great hardship on earth, if you take notice of people's spiritual low, then you know that only people's free will has caused this, and that my will is uninvolved in everything that is bad. Yet I leave people the freedom of their will and thinking, and also rarely hinder their actions which originate from their will and thinking. For without freedom of will, which can indeed result in sinking into the deepest depths, ascending is also impossible. Without freedom of will, a human being cannot attain perfection. Therefore, without freedom of will, he cannot unite with me and become blissfully happy. The human being creates his own state, both on earth and in the spiritual kingdom. For as his will is, so is his lot. If I take away his freedom of will, thought and action, then the human being is in the stage of the animal which is under my law, which thus has to do as I determine, as it corresponds to the laws of nature decreed by me. And then he would eternally be unable to become what his ultimate goal is, a freely creating, perfect spiritual being which works in wisdom and love and is blissfully happy in full possession of the strength from me. Thus, if I offer him supreme beatitude on the one hand, but he strives towards the depths of darkness of his own free will, he will not be prevented from doing so, and people must realize for themselves where free will, if it is wrongly directed, can lead to, in order to correct it of their own accord in the knowledge of a wrong earthly existence with regard to eternity. My creatures once came forth from me freely, products of my strength of love and in possession of free will as a sign of their perfection. But free will also had to be able to develop in every direction. The spiritual being had to have the opportunity to let it become active for every purpose, good as well as evil. And thus constantly turn this will towards me if it wanted to be perfect and thus blissfully happy. That it now turned away from me of its own free will, because it allowed itself to be influenced by a strong spirit which had misused its free will and was now opposed to me, was sin, that is contrary to its state of perfection and contrary to my will, which from eternity only strives for good and only allows good things to come to pass. Thus the being had stepped out of divine order in free will. And to stand outside of the divine order also means to stand outside of light and power. The being became lightless, that is, it fell into a state of complete ignorance, into a state of erroneous thinking and complete darkening of the spirit. And it also became powerless, that is, it was no longer able to create and shape itself according to my eternal order, but could only draw strength from my adversary, which it used for the opposite, for working in the will which was opposed to me, for disrupting the thinking and influencing the will of other beings in order to alienate them from me as well. And this entailed the binding of the will of the beingness in order to pave the way for it to return to me, in order to make this return possible for the being. But the return can only take place again in the stage of free will, and therefore I cannot curtail the human being's free will, even if he sins against my will, no matter how much he rages against himself, against his spiritual life. I leave him freedom of will, no matter how it works out. Only I sometimes end his earthly life out of mercy in order to make it possible for him to recognize his weakness once more in the beyond through the state of weakness, so that he may still change his will in the beyond. And thus the spiritual adversity as well as the great earthly adversity can only be explained by the human being's free will, who can turn both away from himself if he gives this will the right direction. If he turns his will towards me, completely submits to my will and slowly enters his original state again. To be a free, powerful being which is permeated by light, which can create and shape according to its will, but which is always also mine, as soon as the being is perfect. Amen.